Hi there, and welcome to the Skylight Books author reading series. If you'd like to learn more about us and our many upcoming author events, please visit skylightbooks.com, where you can browse our inventory, buy books, and join our Friends with Benefits Club. You can also follow us on Twitter, Tumblr, and Facebook. To speak to a real live bookseller like me, please call 323-660-1175. Thanks for your support, and enjoy.
The Sweetest Fruits has already garnered some fantastic acclaim. LitHub has said of it, Truong does what she does best, painting a vivid portrait of privilege, restlessness, and tenacity through the conflicting experiences of characters grappling with their senses of love, family, and home. Anthony Marr calls it a sublime, many-voiced novel of voyage and reinvention. And then a little bit about the author. Monique Truong is the author of 3 novels, The Book of Salt, Bitter in the Mouth, and now The Sweetest Fruits, and her work has been published in 15 countries. Her awards and honors include the Penn Robert Bingham Fellowship, the New York Public Library Young Lions Award, the Asian American Literary Award, and the American Academy of Arts and Letters Rosenthal Family Foundation Award. Ooh, that's a long one. Diep Tran is a chef and former owner of Good Girl Dinette in Los Angeles. So good. She's an advocate for raising the wages of workers in the restaurant industry. Most recently, she was featured in the 2nd season of Emmy Award-winning series Migrant Kitchen. Please welcome Monique and Diep.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Okay, well, actually, I didn't know that you were going to be introduced by someone else, so I was going to introduce you and then ask you to start with a little reading.
Okay.
So anyway, thanks everybody for coming in. I think it would be nice if just to have a little taste of the Sweetest Fruits, and then we'll get into a little conversation. Shall we?
We shall. Hi. Thank you so much for being here. Do you know what's awesome about all of you, besides the fact that you're here, is that, you know, coming out and actually supporting a writer is an incredible act of generosity, and I really, really appreciate it. And I'll give you a little tip for when you can't come out to support your other friends. Don't email them on the night of, okay? And say, oh, I'm so sorry, I can't. It's all right. Trust me, the writer will know that the person wasn't there, okay? So hey, if I haven't already announced to you one-on-one, I'm incredibly jet-lagged, not just from my flight today from JFK, but also because I had just come back from Switzerland. So now my jet lag has jet lag, which is going to make tonight very interesting. Okay. Oh God. All right. So I'm just going to read you a couple of pages of how this book begins. Okay, and then we'll give it context later on. Patricio Lafcadio Hearn was born hungry. I could tell by the way that he suckled. From the first time that his mouth found the nipple, he was not wont to let it go. His eyes opened and unblinking, watching and daring me to tug myself from him. All babies were born with an empty stomach, but not all of them were born with such need in their eyes. His elder brother, Giorgio, my first blessed one, had to be coaxed and tricked. The tip of my little finger dipped in honey was what he took first into his rosebud mouth. Then, patiently, I would guide him to my breast, where honey and milk would mix. This soothed him, but it was not enough to keep him. Giorgio shared my milk with Patricio for less than 2 months. I beg of you, do not call them George and Patrick. Those are not their names. Their father's language is not mine. Even before I was certain that there would be a blessed second, I suffered his appetite, which was growing in me swift and strong. Patricio demanded of me the small things from the sea. Whelks, which no one sold, because the people on Santa Maura, same as on Sarago, the island where I was born, would not buy something that they could gather like pebbles at the shore. In the mornings, I would leave my furs with old Iota, the only woman on our lane, with no children of her own, in order to bend over the wet sand until I felt lightheaded or until my basket was full. Patricio wanted the whelks boiled, their spiral of flesh removed one by one. He allowed me olive oil and lemon juice with them, but never vinegar. When there was no longer a doubt and whelks became too difficult for me to collect, Patricio insisted on cockles, of which there were cellars, because cockles were found on the sandbars far from shore, where the tide came in like the hand of God. To lose your life for mere cockles is a curse as old as the sea, and may you never hear it spoken. Thanks.
Okay, I was so hungry. And that was so beautiful. And that was like the moment I opened the book and I read, like, this is gonna be so good. It anyway. I'm kind of like a little speechless a little bit because I admire you so much, and this is like a big thing. So, anyways, I'm trying to be as cool as I can.
Okay.
But it's a really an amazing book, and I've like loved all your works, and I really wanted to live longer in the world that you created. So thank you so much. So I really want to ask you, can you talk about the origin of this book? Like, what was it that prompted you to prompted your exploration of Lafcadio Hearn?
Right. Okay, so time for context. Lafcadio Hearn was a half Greek, half Irish author who lived from 1850 to 1904. And I came across him first through a Southern food angle. I was fact-checking my second novel, and I had a Southern Foodways encyclopedia, and in it there was an entry about Lafcadio Hearn. And the reason why is because when he was a young man, he came to the United States and worked as a journalist in Cincinnati, Ohio, and then in New Orleans. And while he was in New Orleans, he wrote what is considered the very first Creole cookbook to be published in the United States. And so this is how he's remembered in New Orleans and among Southern food scholars. But really his claim to sort of fame in the literary world is that after he left New Orleans, he moved to Japan. And the last 14 years of his life were lived there. And he became known as a Western expert on Japanese folklore, ghost stories, and fairy tales. So now this little entry that I read was a very condensed version or chronology of all that. And frankly, none of it made sense. You know, like how did this cookbook author, you know, half Greek, half Irish, end up in Japan? How did he become an expert? I mean, all those things were, you know, questions for me. And when I have a lot of questions, they often end up as a novel. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm glad you had those questions, and because I had never heard of Lafcadio Hearn. You know, I wasn't a student of like Southern cuisine, but when I was telling folks that I would be in conversation with you, they're like, all the Japanese people are like, oh, Lafcadio Hearn, we know who he is. You know, so he looms large.
Yes, he does, because he wrote his most famous collection, I would say, of ghost stories is called Kwaidan, and Kwaidan was made into a really fabulous film I think it was in the late 60s. Yes? Oh, good. Okay.
We have a Hearn fan.
Yeah, and in Japan, he is still read and is beloved. You know, for a very peculiar, well, it's not peculiar, it's understandable. The reason is that, you know, he was living in Meiji era Japan, right? At a time when many of the Japanese intellectuals were moving very fast towards Western thought and sort of, you know, narrative practices and so on. And here was this Westerner who came in and said, but wait, you have these incredible stories, and I'm going to retell them and share them. And in the process, he managed to preserve something that might have disappeared.
So when you're talking, I can feel that there's admiration for Hearn.
Yes.
How did that admiration evolve?
Yeah, it wasn't there from the beginning, clearly, because, well, like I said, one of my first questions about him was, how did he become this expert, right? So I made certain assumptions, and then one being that he must have been fluent in Japanese, right? And from the biographies that I read about him, they were very cagey about that, whether he was fluent or not. And I was like, why is this fact being hidden from me, you know? Well, because he wasn't fluent, right? And doesn't that undermine the notion of being an expert? Yes, it does. Speaking as someone who has lived in Japan to research him and not having Japanese, he was at a huge linguistic disadvantage, right? So then the question becomes, okay, so who did he work with, right? How did he collect these stories? And according to the biographers, it was very much about, there were, you know, young Japanese scholars and academics who were fluent in English, who were his translators and interpreters. Okay, that makes sense. But then, as I read more and more about him, his Japanese wife, Setsu, emerges as someone who was more likely than not the person who collected and sort of shared with him the folklores, the ghost stories, and the fairy tales. Because if you think about it, these are the stories of the common man, right? And common woman, common people. And these are not the stories that necessarily the Japanese scholars would think were something worth sharing with a Westerner, right? So, yes, but I came to that late in the process because I actually had to go to Japan to meet scholars, Japanese scholars who positioned Setsu in that way as a collaborator with Hearn. Because Western biographers would write about her in this way. They would say she was illiterate in English. Well, Hearn was illiterate in Japanese, but they would never then follow up and say that she had an 8th grade education and therefore could read and write in Japanese. Her family was a former samurai family, and so she was, as a girl, actually able to go to school to a limited extent, but enough so. So they would also talk about her in the way that Hearn talked about her in his letters, which is she's a nice, submissive Japanese woman, and I like her very much. She's not essentially pushy and as the Western women that I left behind. That was it. And I thought about that.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, so here you have, in Meiji era, a Japanese woman who is willing to marry a Westerner and have 4 children with him, create a life with him. To me, she doesn't sound submissive. Mm-hmm. She sounds strong. She sounds as if she knew what she was doing, and that she probably did it for a reason, and I wanted to know the reason, right?
Right.
And it was when I went to Japan and to Matsue, the town where they met, where there's now a museum devoted to Hearn, and they also celebrate St. Patrick's Day every year. They have a parade, a big citywide parade.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. And they also make a really good Irish stout there at Chimney Brewery, if you should ever go. But
Can I?
sure.
Because I think when people try to describe this book, they say, "Oh, it's about Lafcadio Hearn."
Yeah.
And so it seemed like he would be the most important figure, but he actually isn't the most important. He is like in the periphery, and because he cut such a fine figure in society,
Right.
But this, I really love that it's like, but it was the ability of the women in his life that he's able to cut this fine figure, and I like the shade that all these women throw, and it's like, it's like you can, there's still love in there, but there's still like, he doesn't come off as an expert. He just comes off as this guy who doesn't know a lot of stuff. Just ask questions, and these women are like, duh, so I love it's a quiet, but it's not quiet. It's just like, there's a lot of rage in there. So, I mean, I wanted, because they were so overlooked in like history and scholarly work, did you have to, what was the research involved to uncover, like you said, that it took you, to meet up with one scholar to find the death date of one of the main characters?
Right.
Yeah, Alethea.
Alethea. Well, that's how I pronounce it.
All right.
If has anyone listened to the audiobook?
What is it called? What is her name?
Well, I suggested Alethea, but I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I'll
check.
The suggestion went through or not. Right. Well, before I answer that, I want to say that this is the thing about Hearn and men like him, right? We have to acknowledge begrudgingly that without Hearn, I wouldn't have met Rosa or Alethea or Setsu. Right, the 3 main sort of narrators of this novel, and without him, if it's because he lived and they supported his endeavors, that we still have some vestige of them, right? Mm-hmm. Because history, as we know, is a partial history. Mm-hmm. So partial. In the fact that, everything had to go through, essentially, I mean, not all history, but let's just talk about Western history. it had to go through a white man before it was history, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It had to be seen and documented by their eyes, or didn't exist. So yes, so that's the begrudging part, right? But at least at least we have remnants of a Rosa and Alethea Asetsu. So in terms of the research I did and trying to sort of find them in history, I mean, I could talk forever about it, but so I'm gonna sort of narrow it down to Alethea's research. And Alethea was his first wife, and he met her in Cincinnati. They were around the same age, just around 2 years age difference. She was a formerly enslaved biracial woman who was born in Kentucky and went to Cincinnati after the Civil War ended and was working as a cook in the boarding house where Hearn would eventually have a room. And I based her voice on 2 documents. One was actually an article that Hearn himself wrote about Alethea. And it was a feature article that he wrote in the Cincinnati commercial. And they were already married at this time. They were living, they were keeping house, as the term was. And he's essentially writing about, it's pretty clear that he's writing about how they really got to know each other, like that first conversation, right? And what drew him to her. And it was basically, he writes about himself in the third person, that he's a reporter. He is sitting on the steps of a boarding house kitchen, and the cook, and he describes her, and it's clear that she's biracial, and he talks about how she's a ghost seer, right? And you know that he has this lifelong obsession with ghosts and the uncanny and the eerie. And he says that her voice, her story telling ability is just natural, and it's clear he's just enamored with it. And then he puts the rest of the article in quotes. And so it's basically, essentially, the documentation of her voice. And why this is so fascinating is because Hearn's other writings about African American subjects, he would assign to them a very sort of broken English, right? A very sort of, I don't like to use the term pidgin, but dialect, let's call it an exaggerated dialect. And he didn't do that with Alethea. And I thought that was significant. And so what was clear about this feature article is that she is an incredible storyteller. She talks about the flora, the fauna, she talks about the sounds of owls. She talks about, it's very, she gives you the full sort of atmosphere of these stories, right? What truly makes a ghost story compelling, right? Just truly putting you in that space. And so it was clear, right, why Hearn was so in love with her and why he started to, to really fall for her. But what I couldn't figure out was why she would fall in love with him. Now, this is the thing.
Yeah, because he came out kind of creepy.
Okay. A little bit more context about Hearn. When Hearn was, I think when he was 16, he lost vision in one of his eyes. And so he developed quite a complex about that. And became really sort of socially awkward. I think he was kind of socially awkward before. And then his other eye would later in his life would sort of bulge because it was doing the work of two, you know. And some people describe him as having sort of a hunch shoulder. He was 5'3", so he wasn't that tall. And he was just, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if you met him at a bar, you'd be like, hey, laugh. Let's have a drink.
But I kind of got it as because he was demonstrative of like his admiration when she talked and when she told her stories, and that's pretty intoxicating if like you're used to not being seen or heard. Like, hey, somebody wants to fucking listen to my story, you know, like
Right.
And there's like some humanity there. I can see that.
That is exactly the key, is listening. And I would say that Hearn, above everything else, was an excellent listener. He listened to Alethea's stories. He listened to Setsu's stories. And why that's significant, not just because of the personal relationship that they had with each other, but rather these were also stories told by women. They belong, you know, to women and children and the common man. And that didn't deter Hearn. It didn't shut him off from hearing them, you know. And that is what made his name, right? Is that he then retold these stories. And really, you know, that's how he achieved his literary fame, was because he was listening.
Yeah, he was a close listener.
He was a close listener. Right. I love how one of the things that Setsu actually wrote a memoir, a very short memoir, about her life with Hearn after he passed away. And she described how he would make her tell the stories over and over again until he finally heard them, you know? And I just want to talk a little bit about the language that the two of them used with each other. Okay, so you've already heard that Hearn was not fluent in Japanese, and Setsu didn't have English. So basically, what the biographers, and also Hearn, and also Setsu sort of talk about is that there was this sort of created language that they use within the household with each other and then with their children. And the language was basically simple English words and simple Japanese words, right? So that's the basic. But what Setsu talks about, which is really the thing that like sparks my imagination, is that sometimes Hearn would assign a different meaning to a common word, you know, a meaning that is subjective to the two of them, which is what we all do in relationships, right? Mm-hmm. Close friends or our lovers or partners, we have our private language, right? And we know that that private language is something that's created not just by one person in that relationship. Both people have to agree on the meaning, right? Mm-hmm. Right? It's a co-creation. Right. And yet every single Hearn biographer that I've read talked about it being Hearn's language. So they assigned it to him because he's the writer, right? He's the man. He's the imaginative literary one, as if Setsu had nothing to do with this. I mean, and I mean, you read that and you know it's wrong. You just know it, right?
I think you had talked about how like somebody described her writing as quaint, or what was it, like a pretty, like as if like it's cute or something, like not necessarily like this intellectual thing or intelligent thing.
Well, the thing about Setsu is because she had up to an 8th grade education. She was from Matsue, which is on the Sea of Japan, and it was a city of like 40,000 when Hearn first came there. So it's not a tiny place for sure, but it had its own dialect,
Okay.
and it had its own accent as well. So you can imagine how Hearn must have sounded when he spoke the very few words of Japanese that he had, right? And also, that Japanese women, and still do to a certain extent, have a sort of a feminine language. There are words that Japanese women will use that Japanese men won't. And there's a joke it's a joke, but it's true, that when you go to Japan and the young white men who move over there and start dating Japanese women, they actually speak more like Japanese women than they talk like Japanese men, right? So it's
I love it.
I know. They shouldn't be ashamed of it.
Yeah.
Right. It's a privilege. But compared to, they eventually did move to Tokyo, where Hearn was teaching English, not the language, but like English literature at Imperial University, which is University of Tokyo now. But compared to the scholars there, the academics, the elite, yes, her language was quaint. But so was Hearn.
Right.
Right? So, but these are the things that I pieced together. The biographers couldn't piece it together. They could not even admit that Hearn didn't have Japanese. I mean,
How did they skirt around it? Like, how did it? Yeah.
Yeah, I can't even tell you at this point how they did it, but they did.
So it's just like omission,
Omission.
Okay.
Yes, of course. Yeah, but it's the kind of omission where you're like, remember like when you're a child and you're like, oh, these two people go into a room and then a baby comes out and you don't know why and you don't know how. It's that kind of thing.
I still don't know.
Yeah. But yeah.
I want to. Whose voice came to you first?
Well, the first line of the book came to me.
Okay.
Yeah, which was that he was born hungry. So it was Rosa's voice. I knew I wanted to begin with the mother and the scene of her, or a reference to her breastfeeding him, because that's the first meal. That's the absolute first meal, right? Mm-hmm. And yet women, it's I mean, I don't even have to say it, right? It's fundamental. It's fundamental. Mm-hmm. It's sustaining. It is the beginning.
Right.
And yet all of that is somehow bizarrely devalued. And women still have to hide behind like blankets and like little breastfeeding rooms, I mean, yeah.
Well, actually, that kind of brings me. I'm going to jump a little bit, but I wanted to actually talk a little about like what I call like the myth of the first. Okay. Like Lafcadio Hearn was the first to write a Creole book, the first to do all the stuff, but he really wasn't. I mean, he maybe have been the first to write it or have given up. Like, okay, it's kind of like both, like the myth of like this white person being the first to do some shit, and then like also like the first woman or the first person of color, like. The first woman permitted to do some shit, the first person called, admitted to something. So like, it's kind of like when you like peg someone as the first woman to do something. It's almost like a backhanded compliment that women couldn't figure how to do this until now. Mm-hmm. But then you have this other part where like, the first white person go to South America and then patent something that already exists. So like, I really like that. It's like he's kind of like. Credited to be the first of something, but like what this book does is it's like actually he's just the first person who had all the mechanisms
Yeah.
to make something that like a book that
Right.
would stay
Right.
on further. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit more about like if well, anyway, maybe that's not the question, but like if now I'm all flustered.
Oh.
So yeah, so I guess I kept thinking about that. Your book has to be a certain amount. Like, is there like, did you at some point want to just make it about one person versus three? Like would it be a trilogy? You know what I mean? Because it was just like,
Right.
or was there just you had researched as much as you could? Like at some point, did you just wanted to do one, or was it always considered three?
Right. Well, there could have been many more women's voices
Because Elizabeth.
Well,
Brisbane.
Elizabeth Beaslin is also a voice in this novel, but I didn't write her voice. She was Hearn's first biographer, and they were friends since she was 18. He was probably in his 30s when they met. She went on to be a very well-known editor and in New York City. And she was also the person who raced Nellie Bly. Do you remember when Nellie did the 80, around the world in 80 days race? Yeah.
Like girl reporter.
Yes,
around the
two
world,
girl
yeah.
reporters,
Yeah.
right. Except Elizabeth lost, so no one remembers her. Yes. So there could have been even more women because there's like a whole nother part of his life. Well, it wasn't that long, but it was very significant, where he lived in the West Indies, and he certainly had lovers there. So, and he also, I mean, Hearn was, for a man with one eye and kind of short and weird, he was quite a ladies' man, Often he had to pay for the ladies, that's for sure. But, he liked...
He's a womanizer.
He could have been a sex addict, I don't know. But this is the thing, though. I wanted, for sure, to have this narrative about a well-known traveler, right? To be, to really be told from the points of view of women who did not have the access or privilege to travel in the same way. They do all travel. They do all cross borders, but in different ways than Hearn was able to, And so I thought that it was important to open up that sort of narrative of the expert, the single expert, right?
Yeah.
Your focus is on the first, my focus is on the it's like that awful sort of Mrs. Trump's like her theme, like be best or something. I mean, it's like, you mean be the one person, be one, like
Right.
there's only one best, right? So anyways.
Well, she buys into it. Yeah, sure.
Right. But anyways, the point is that, I wanted this narrative to be opened up. I wanted to invite other people who were present to have their say, because they were there. Like I said, history is a partial history, right? So I wanted to sort of invite these women to also weigh in, right?
Yeah.
And you're right, it's not about Hearn.
Yeah, it kind of isn't. I mean, when you read it, it's like that's the least
So?
just interesting part,
Exactly.
in a way.
Exactly, but at the same time, right, I have to acknowledge that without Hearn, I wouldn't have these characters, right?
Right.
Right. So I've read reviews where people are like, "Wow, Hearn's such an interesting guy. How come she didn't write about Hearn?" I'm like, well, Hearn left almost 30 books behind and volumes of correspondence. Go read them. Why would I spend time doing that? That's absurd to me. You know, and why would I celebrate someone who's already celebrated?
Well, I think you made some fanboys upset.
Yeah, I know.
Because you're kind of ruining a hero.
Right.
You know? But,
Yeah. Well, screw them.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm actually, my favorite character is Alethea. Could you tell me more how, I mean, I'm just so curious because you're so good at finding, like, this person that very little is written about, and then you're able to, like, unearth all this stuff about them. And, like, so, like, I'm very curious about how you were able to research her. And
Well, with Alethea, you know, there's of course a lot of adjacent research that can be done, right? About, I mean, besides just like the cooking aspect of it, but what her life would have been like as a young enslaved woman. All of that, you know, is available through historical records, right? So I did that research, but really, when I thought about her, besides the fact that she was this incredible storyteller, I told you that there were two documents that I relied on. The second document really, I think, to me, told me what kind of woman she was. She, in 1906, gave an interview to the Cincinnati Enquirer. And that's really kind of the if you can imagine the section for Alethea that's in the Sweetest Fruits as the unedited version of that interview, right? And the reason why she's giving this interview is because she is filing papers in probate court to assert that she was married to Hearn, and therefore she is the rightful heir. Right? This is in 1906, an African-American woman who does not have access to the written word, you know, is doing this. What resolve and will and strength does that take? Right?
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and also, I mean, when you finish that, also like how she kept recipes. You know, like it didn't surprise me because like here's this woman who like, I mean, when I read that, I immediately thought of like Tony Tipton Martin's The Jemima Code. You know, like that. Just like when you said about like, you know, all women's work is undervalued. I think it's like, you know, we're just like nameless hands that serve, right? But like she like you needed to learn so many skills in order, like she memorized all her recipes, like you know, like you have to be super intelligent to do all that, but it was seen as something natural. You know, something that didn't need to be honed.
Right, and that it only becomes a something noteworthy when someone writes a cookbook. You know, publishes the cookbook like Hearn did.
I love this one segment when like I think like she like laughs when she hears that he's written a cookbook. She's like, what?
What? That guy? The guy that like went to the kitchen with me just to flirt with me, or like, you know, to tell me like how to garnish my food because he had it garnished in a restaurant somewhere, you know. The thing is, when I read, I don't know if I said that the very first work by Hearn that I read was the Creole Cookbook. And it was clear from it that he didn't know anything. One of the things that he said in the intro to it was that men are better cooks than women because they're more scientifically minded, right?
Facts.
And then but the thing is, I was trying to sort of unearth this idea of how this man how did he become so interested in food that he actually wanted to write a cookbook about it, right? And when I found out that Hearn's first wife was a cook, I mean, that made total sense, right? You cannot live with a cook. Anyone here lives with a cook? No, okay. And not, you know, sort of take on sort of that that kind of worldview where food becomes primary, you know. And that started to make more sense to me, right? So they were, Alethea and Hearn were married in Cincinnati. When he went to New Orleans, he went without her. So, and they never saw each other again after that. But how do we get to this?
Alethea is like, you wrote a cookbook?
Oh, right. Oh, that's right. Her incredulousness at this fact.
Because also when they were living together, he kind of only wanted like Irish food, like he
was very like he had very particular ideas about food. But the thing is, I don't think they have Hearn, and it comes out in the Alethea section. Hearn has this other life without her, this kind of public life where he goes and, he is drinking wine and eating bread from Germany and, and just like he has this other life beyond their domestic sphere and the two don't meet except for this kind of intervention that he often tries to make by trying to, oh, you'll love this word, elevate her food, right? Garnish it, that sort of thing, right? But yes, well, maybe it's not clear, but I don't know, there's no documentation of what Alethea thought of the cookbook, so that's my fiction. But yeah, she would have been like,
I buy it.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
All right.
I read in an interview that you tried to pitch this book a while ago, or this novel, and then your former agent said that they wouldn't be able to sell it because there were no Vietnamese characters.
Yeah.
Can you share that?
Yeah. Well, that's pretty much it. Right? I mean, and this is, I'll tell you, this editor was the agent who sold The Book of Salt, who sold Bitter in the Mouth. She's someone who knows my work really well. She's no longer with us. And I think she was actually really talking and speaking from a position of just, that's the reality of publishing, And so, but this was maybe, 10 years ago, when I first had this little inkling of an idea, and I shared it with her. And it did devastate me that this was her response, right? Because I do think that, I think writers and creative folks, we do feel that at a certain, maybe there's a certain point where the field opens up for us, because it's no longer the first time out or the second time out. And then to realize that no, darling. See how you look? This is your body. This is your identity. So this is what you're going to write about, And I do think that is, clearly I managed to sell the work, right? It's in the world. But I still think it's going to have a very difficult sort of journey out there, reaching readers, because it's not an easy sell. It's not, this is the story of my life, or this is, the story of my mother's life, or this is the story of my grandmother's life, I'm not saying that to devalue in any way those stories. But I want our imagination is beyond our bodies. That's imagination, right? It's just like you as a chef. if someone just simply said, "Oh, you're Vietnamese American, you can only cook Vietnamese food, right?"
Well, they would say, do you cook regular food or Vietnamese food?
Oh, beautiful. That's gorgeous.
That's what they said about rice. Oh, I heard about Good Girl Dinette. Oh, I heard you said regular food and Vietnamese food.
Wow.
And I was like, what the fuck? You know, like,
Yeah.
So yeah, and I'm like, oh no.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, everybody who knows me knows I hate memoirs. So like I just bristle against autobiography because yeah, like somehow that's the only thing you can do. Like you don't get to create, you don't get to imagine, and if you get to imagine, you have to imagine it within this something that looks like you. So
Right.
that's what I like. That's why I'm so excited about this book. Actually, you know that it's got such a range of voices, and it's wonderfully written, and it's like I think it's gonna change people's ideas of like who can write what. Like just like Hearn can be anything. He eventually became Japanese. Like and he like, transformed himself, but somehow like people of color, we can't travel. Like the only way we travel is like being refugees. Like
Right.
Alethea, like she was definitely like she ran away. Hearn's mother ran away and then ran back, But yeah, so and even Hearn's wife, Tetsu, she also had to like leave that former life of being part of her samurai family, So like somehow like it's under duress versus some sort of yearning for some creative outlet or something like that.
Right. And with that said, though, that was also, part of the project of imagining them.
Yeah, true.
Right? Is that because of the limitations of these women's lives, it does not mean, however, that they did not have desire and will and choices.
Yes,
Right.
I concur.
They are not the same as Hearns and the men around them, but they do make choices and consequential, incredibly brave choices, each one of
Yes.
them. But I want to say something about being a refugee. I think of The Sweetest Fruits as a refugee novel.
Okay, yeah. Yeah.
Except there's no Vietnamese folks in it, and there are no, refugees that would fit like international law definition of refugees. But it's because I'm a refugee, and everything I write is through the lens of being displaced and being no longer tied to a piece of land, and knowing how land and nationality does not necessarily construct home.
I think that's a great way to end, actually. Because I'd
Yay.
really love to open it up to Q&A. Who's going to be brave to ask the first question? Maybe the Hearn fan?
My world's in pieces right now.
I have some people for you to talk to. There's a support group out there for you. Totally. I'm jet lagged. Come on. Just, yes. Yeah. Well, no. I mean, yeah, probably, but I didn't hear the resistance. I only heard the positives, right? Because when a book goes out there, you don't sit down and talk with the editors who didn't like it, right? You only sit down with the people who are interested in it. And, yeah, but I'll tell you that I the resistance that I've have faced since is it's really about knowing how to position the book, and how to position me as the author. And I had the same issues with the second novel, which is, it was my reimagining of a Southern Gothic novel. It was set in the American South. It was of the three books, it's the one that's closest to me. I grew up in the South. I grew up in the very town that I wrote about in the second novel, and yet the publisher still could not figure out how to position it or me. I'm like, it's a Southern novel, duh. I grew up in the American South, duh, but no, that just didn't happen. So I don't know. I think I just, there's a bifurcation, I think, that is happening, that has been happening in publishing, where your acquiring editor is actually someone who truly does love your manuscript. Like, there's something about it that speaks to them. And then once they acquire it, then all the other little rats come in, right? And they're like the marketing rat and the publicity rats, and they can't figure it out. Oh, hello. This
is recognition. This is a mirror coming back.
But it becomes this committee, right, of people who are trying very hard to package it, to make it into, something that will appeal to a 50-year-old woman in Arkansas. And when they can't figure it out, then you are doomed. You, author, doomed, And, all I want to do is have the ability to write another book, and I have these stories within me that I want to continue to put into the world, But unfortunately, that is no longer about being a mid-list or being like a award-winning or, all the euphemisms for writers who don't sell a lot of books, right? Now it's about writers who sell a lot of books, and when I say now, I don't mean just like this year. It's been going on for a long time. It's been going on since publishing houses somehow got into their heads that they are actually going to make a profit. What? That's a joke. There are certain, books that will make you a profit, but the bulk of literary fiction is not. It's never gonna do that. You have your Margaret Atwood. That's great, yay. But the rest of us, we're just gonna tell our quirky little stories, and hopefully you'll continue to come and buy and read, But I don't know. I don't know if there's going to be another novel out of me, because I really do think it's abysmal out there. But, maybe I don't know.
Well, I think this book has a lot of traction so far, and it has a lot of momentum. Here I am.
I know. This is the greatest thing about Diep. There are many great things, as many of you know, but that even though there is this incredible cynicism in you, there's also this...
Because I'm a cynic, like when I see something that really, inspires me, I'm like, hell yeah, this is going to do great, yeah.
Wow. Let's hope there's a lot of Diep Tran in the world.
There is.
Yes.
Publishers Weekly, best book, list of best books, 2019, New York Times, recommended reads, editor's list. I forgot what. What publication. So, yeah.
Yeah, I feel very blessed that there are editors who are, of these publications that have taken notice. But I'll point out something to you about that Publishers Weekly best of fiction list. Did you notice how many titles that were novels in translation or short story collections in translation? That is a bizarro list. I mean, not bizarro because these are not great books, but bizarro because they do not reflect book buying taste, And I am thrilled that, there's so many works in translations. But the statistics about translated literature, right, in the United States is less than 3% of published books. So yeah.
Okay.
So Publishers Weekly is kind of like aspirational.
Okay. Well, I mean, the writing is beautiful. It's cinematic. I mean, I'm waiting for the HBO 3-part series, and actually, no, 9-part, 3 episodes per character,
Ooh.
Yeah. And Hearn is just like a shadow, So, I mean, when I saw, I'm like, this is just, I can already picture, Rosa.
I can already picture this too, but Hearn would be like front and center.
Okay, all right. You know what? That's like in life, right?
Right.
So let Hearn be the door into it.
I can already see Jake Gyllenhaal as Hearn.
He's too tall. What? He's like 5'3".
They'll just make everyone else like shorter.
Yeah, statuesque.
Or taller, whatever. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to be in conversation with you. I feel like I'm really out of my depth, but I feel like next time I'd love to do a dinner with you.
Yay.
Have whelks and cockles
and sea urchins.
Actually, there's like an infestation of sea urchins in California, so prices are going to go down. So, yes.
There is no way that sea urchins are an infestation.
It's true. It's
that is a
bumper
wealth.
crop.
That,
a bumper crop. They said all the kelp beds are just booming.
Let's do something about that. You and me.
Yes. Well, this has been great. Unless there's any other burning questions, we want to leave time for Monique to sign books, et cetera, et cetera.
Et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bill.
You've been listening to the Skylight Books author reading series. Don't forget, you can listen to this and all of our other great podcasts at skylightbooks.com. Thanks again for stopping by, and we hope to see you soon.